company connection, sense of purpose, loyalty, is cratering. Connection to others in the workplace cratering over the last decades. And you situate that against the backdrop of an epidemic of loneliness in this society in the United States, and deaths of despair. We're in real dire shape here. So if anybody could find a way to build that kind of connection, right, and evidence it through neuroscience, so it's not just lip service, it's for real, it's up here, that would be the ticket.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show, the home of Googleization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on all around us and explore the disruptive convergence of technology, business, and people. Here are your hosts, Ira Wolfe and Jason Cochran.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. Thank you for being part of Googleization Nation. I'm Ira Wolfe. Jason, unfortunately, is not with us today. He's tied up in some meetings. So if you think this is just another podcast, think again. We are the voice of the most important conversations on the future of work, confronting business leaders and people today. Our goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the ever-changing convergence of people, business, and technology. Mark Twain once said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." So living in what I call the post-pandemic era of never normal, a lot of things we thought we knew for sure just ain't so. And one of those things just happens to be what we talk about on Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization each week, leading and managing people. So take, for example, ever since I was a kid, which was a bunch of decades ago, I was taught that each of us had a left brain and a right brain. Fortunately for most of us, that's still true. What ain't true is that our left brain only fires when it comes to math and logic, and our right brain only comes alive when it comes to arts and creativity. And yet many companies still hire and managers still fire based on that myth. Or how about this one? We only use 10% of our brain. Even when that seems to be true, it's not. Or how about we all need to be better multitaskers? Here's a spoiler alert. Our brains say, no way, Jose. Or here's one of my favorites. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Personally, as an older baby boomer, I'm pretty thrilled that ain't true. Well, today, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Michael Platt to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization stage to help us sort things out about how our brain actually works, to dispel these myths once and for all, and to explore the fascinating world of neuroeconomics and neuromanagement. Michael is the author of The Leader's Brain. He's a neuroscientist. He holds appointments in the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine, School of Arts and Sciences, and the Wharton School. He's director of the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, where I had the good fortune to meet him this past summer when I participated in Wharton's executive education program, Understanding the Brain, using neuroscience to deliver better results. And just recently, Michael hosted the Wharton Neuroscience Summit in early November, which was nothing short of amazing. And I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit about that too. And in his spare time, Michael's co-founder of Cogwear, a wearable technology company, and we'll be talking about that too. But before Michael joins me, it's once again time for our Perfect Labor Storm segment. This is where we focus each week on a disruptive, surprising, or worrisome trend that we believe you should know. Because one of the topics I'm sure we're going to cover today relates to human connection and the ongoing controversy between remote and in-person work, I pulled a stat from one of our recent interviews with Gallup's Vibhas Ritanji. Gallup's research revealed that only 16 to 17% of employees feel connected to their culture of their organization. That's less than 1 out of 7. But that's not the stat that bothered Vibhas the most. The stat that keeps him and leaders up at night should be this. Only 39% of senior leaders and managers feel connected. That's more than double what of the frontline workers and other workers. And in October 23, the 2023 TELUS Mental Health Index survey that was just released this morning, 23% of workers report a high mental health risk, 41% report a moderate mental health risk. This results in 51 lost working days per year due to depression, 47 lost working days due to anxiety, and 42 days due to workplace conflict. So fortunately, neuroscience might have a thing or two to say about why these things are happening. And here's a hint: where people work isn't the biggest problem. If you'd like to listen to our interview with Vibhas or TELUS Health's Paula Allen, that's a mouthful, you can download the replays on your favorite podcast or watch on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com/Ira Wolfe and check out the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization playlist. There's over 300 episodes on it. And two more quick announcements before I welcome Michael. If you're interested in learning more about management myths that neuroscience is debunking, subscribe to my free weekly newsletter at irawolf.beehive.com. That's irawolf.beehiiv.com. In this week's issue, I talk about rethinking busyness as we race against the clock, trying to get everything done before the holidays and the start of the new year. And finally, if you're looking for an inspiring holiday gift this year, you can download my latest book, The Change Insights to Self-Empowerment. The download is free. Just go to my website, irawolf.com, or you can give a gift with purpose this year and purchase signed copies by reaching out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or my website. And now it's time to welcome Michael Platt. Michael, welcome. Good to see you again.
Hey, Ira. Good to see you in the interwebs after seeing you in real life.
Yeah, that was a fascinating day. And before we let you off the air here, I definitely want to find out what some of your takeaways were from that, because it was a long list, and I think that was the first time since 2019, before the pandemic, that you met in person, right?
Yeah, that was our first in-person summit since 2019. So it was very exciting for us, and I think is kind of launching Wharton Neuroscience 2.0 in some sense, with a bold new call to action.
Well, it was a successful launch, a little bit more than Elon Musk's recent launches, but no, it was a super day, and what an incredible group of talented people, and for everybody else, hopefully, I guess next year, November is usually when you have it, or sometime in the fall.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody keep that in mind. But first, you've had an interesting journey. We certainly want to get into what's going on in neuroscience, but tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this, because I found it interesting. I think you studied anthropology as a college student, and when I went to school, anthropology was probably one step lower than philosophy, when people would say, well, what are you going to do when you grow up? How are you going to what kind of career do you have when you have philosophy? And it seemed that anthropology was probably even on par with that, or a little bit lower. And yet here you are. So tell us a little about your story.
Anthropology is like one step up from American civilization. That was a big kind of, I don't know, trash can major when I was in college. But think about how my parents must have felt. So here I am, first kid in the family to go to college, working class kid, and like I choose anthropology as a major. It's kind of maybe not exactly what everybody was thinking of, but it really grabbed me, and actually it turned out to be really foundational, because anthropology is kind of the broadest lens that you can have on human nature. So you look at biology, you look at prehistory, culture, and linguistics, all of those different fields, and so it kind of gives you a very rich foundation, although not a lot of tools to work with. So I did my undergrad and my PhD in anthropology, but at the time I was done with finishing my PhD, I realized if I wanted to really understand human nature, I was going to have to be able to get in here to look under the hood and see what was going on. So I went to NYU and did a postdoc in neuroscience, which is essentially like a second PhD in neuroscience. So it took a long time to do all that, but putting it together put me in a really cool position to ask some, I think, bigger questions than perhaps other people are asking in neuroscience, about kind of what makes us tick, really. And I've been able to use the tools to get there. But it's been a long journey. I was at Duke for 15 years in the med school, ran the Institute for Brain Sciences there for 4 or 5 years before coming here, which is just like kid in a candy store. You know, I get to play in medicine, I get to play in psychology, and I get to play in Wharton, which is the really disruptive part of this whole gig, which is like, hey, how can we take the tools, insights, analytics from neuroscience and put them into service of business?
And that's what I love about this conversation, because I mean, your background wasn't biology, it wasn't medicine, it wasn't coming from the sciences in that regard. And in fact, you know, I guess anthropology is somewhat of a science, but that wasn't necessarily what people thought about science and chemistry and biology, or my path of pre-med and you know what my career was. And anthropology was an elective you might have taken or avoided.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
at that point. So, but here you are, and you know, I think that parallels where we are, even with the course that I took. What, you know, how is neuroscience? How does neuroscience relate to business, and why managers need to understand this? And it's not something that, oh, it doesn't fall under behavioral health, you know, problem. I mean, it
Right.
does, but the overlap is incredible. So here we are, and there's so many relevant topics, and I can talk to you all day, and I'm sure you can do the same. Um, there's so much going on right now in the workplace. So we have this conflict between uh, remote work and in person and hybrid. So we definitely want to cover human connection. Part of that is about how do we connect people to culture when they're not there. And frankly, we, as Gallup has proven year after year, a decade after decade, managers weren't very good at that before the pandemic, and this just ripped the band-aid off, or pulled back the curtain. But beyond, you know, so we'll get into employee experience, but there were a couple things that just blew my mind this summer in your course. And the one was the Apple Samsung study that you did. And I think that just connected for me, and I want to help connect the dots for other people. Of You said a few things. One is brand loyalty. People treat brands like people, and obviously,
Some brands.
some brands. Yeah, good. We'll dig into that. But I think there's so many parallels there when we're trying to address how do we improve the experience for employees? How do we elevate the engagement? But we're doing stuff the same old way. I mean, it's like we're rearranging the chairs on the Titanic when you're sitting on some really, you know, pretty crazy, relevant, revealing research. So share, if you can
Yeah.
share a little bit of the background on this Apple Samsung,
Yeah.
and then we can go from there.
Well, I'm pleased that you connected that to workplace connection. So how to build, you know, the way that Apple has built this incredible relationship with their customers. It is exactly like the connection you'd have with a child or your romantic partner, right? It's enduring. It's really love, honestly. People have said that for a while, but we actually proved it. So, you know, for a long time in marketing, there's been this notion that, you know, when we relate to brands, that we use essentially the same hardware in our heads that we use to relate to other people. I mean, you know, we talk about brands like they're people. We give them personality attributes to create a brand. It's a masculine brand. It's a rugged brand, etc. But is that really how our brains relate to brands? And that was an open question. So we answered it by and we did so by looking at the way that people verbally responded to news about their own smartphone brand, either Apple or Samsung, and how their brains responded. So it could be good news, bad news, or neutral news. And perhaps not surprisingly, people responded verbally as if their smartphone brand were a person. So for your own brand, you'd report something like empathy. I feel good for good news about my brand. I feel bad for bad news about my brand. It's exactly what Apple people said, and they didn't feel so much for Samsung. And Samsung customers expressed the same feelings for their own brand. Okay, they also expressed a little bit of Schadenfreude or reverse empathy for Apple, saying, "Oh, I feel bad when I hear good news about Apple, and feel good when I hear bad news about Apple." Fair enough, fine. But we had the tools to look under the hood to see what was going on in their brains, the hidden, covert mental and emotional processes that were ongoing while they encountered this news. And it was really revealing because Apple people are telling the truth. I don't know whether they know that or don't know that, but their brain activity was exactly paralleled their verbal reports. That is, that their brain showed evidence of joy for good news about Apple and evidence of pain for bad news about Apple, and pretty much nothing for Samsung. And the brains of Samsung customers were very, very different. If you're the CMO of Samsung, I think you'd be a little worried because you're spending a lot of money trying to build this relationship with customers, and yet it's having no effect on their brains. So when Samsung customers hear good news about Samsung, it's crickets in the brain. We didn't see anything. And when they hear bad news about Samsung, it's crickets in the brain. We didn't see anything. The only thing we found evidence of was this Schadenfreude. So we found that Samsung customers' brains lit up with joy in response to bad news about Apple and lit up with pain in response to good news about Apple. So I think this is super interesting in so many ways. I think probably the biggest take-home message for this audience is that neuroscience can reveal things, reveal hidden thoughts and feelings that you don't even have access to yourself, right? Either you don't know, you can't access, or you don't want to say. And that's been the sort of devil in the details for marketing and management forever, because honestly, all of the work that we do in those fields is based on self-report. So, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about, what do you think about that? How much would you pay for that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Are you creative? Are you disciplined and focused? And we know that those sort of self-reports are horribly inaccurate, right? And often misleading and often, self misleading. So that's, I think, the beauty of this study. The other thing about this study, though, is it provided a foundation for us. I mean, getting onto this question of connection to a company and a brand, to use that as a foundation for understanding what connection to a company might look like. As you mentioned before, company connection, sense of purpose, loyalty, is cratering, connection to others in the workplace, cratering over the last decades. And you situate that against the backdrop of an epidemic of loneliness in this society in the United States, and deaths of despair. We're in real dire shape here. So if anybody could find a way to build that kind of connection, right, and evidence it through neuroscience, so it's not just lip service, it's for real, it's up here, that would be the ticket. And I know I've been talking for a bit, but I'll tell you about a study we just completed. We just wrapped up with one of our corporate partners that was able to show just that.
Yeah, and so let's keep going on that. I was just sitting back and listening, so you could have kept going. But let's make that connection, because again, there is so, I think on every manager's desk or desktop is a checklist and employee engagement or retention. I mean, we call it by all these different names, but it's how do we have a better employee experience? How do we create that brand, that loyalty? How do we stop this quiet quitting? How do we get people more engaged? And I think it's incredible that when I mentioned that Gallup study, that one out of 7 people are connected to their company culture, and only 2 out of 5 managers and leaders are connected to that culture. And the blame seems to be put on, well, that's because that's the remote work problem or the hybrid work problem.
I mean, I think that's a big element of it. Something like 27% of the U.S. workforce is in a remote or hybrid, setting. So 40-some million people, that's a lot. But and I think that has had something to do with it. We've all felt Zoom fatigue. That Zoom fatigue is the struggle that our brains go through to try to read all those nonverbal cues out of each, a three-dimensional human squashed into 2 dimensions in a little box on the screen. It's just really hard to do. And you don't have and you're forced into time slots. You don't have those water cooler conversations. You don't have conversations with lunch. So there's a lot of reasons why that may be true. So we've worried about that. And one of the companies we've worked with, which is I love this company, Slalom. They're like what I call them is this sort of, I don't know, crunchy granola McKinsey. They're like the touchy-feely, good-hearted, Deloitte or something like that. They really at least their values are to put employees first, and they put a lot of effort into measuring the employee experience and employee connection. But like any kind of index like that, any kind of survey, potentially flawed. We don't know whether it's really drilling down and having any kind of validity. So it was kind of one of our challenges, was to evaluate that index and to really evaluate in a scientific way, a neuroscientific way, the connection or not lack of connection that employees had to the company and to each other. And so these were so what we did is we got these wearable brain monitoring devices, brain sensing devices, and we created a video to train Slalom employees how to wear them and how to collect data from themselves at work. And then they would do that, and then they would clean them off, and then they'd ship it to the next person. So we had like 20 of these devices going around the company all over the country. So it was pretty cool. We had people in a bunch of different cities and demographics, but these people had never worked together in person. So they were all online. Big question is whether the characteristics, the neuroscience characteristics that characterize real world relationships, good relationships, actually happen at work and happen at work online, right? And so kind of going back to the Apple Samsung study, one of the features of human experience, when we really have a good connection with somebody, when you really click, you've got chemistry, what happens is your brains begin to synchronize. So it's this amazing thing called brain synchrony. It's in Emil Durkheim's terms, the collective effervescence, that sort of tingle you get when you go to a football game with 100,000 people and you're all in the stands together enjoying it. You could be at home on your couch. It's not the same thing, right? So we now know what that is, I think. And when you see higher brain synchrony, that's indicative of friendship. You can predict who's going to become friends later based on whether people show synchronous brain activity while they're watching a bunch of stupid videos. I mean, it's kind of crazy. But certain things, this brain synchrony predicts trust. It predicts cooperation, teamwork, communication, right? It's quite extraordinary, like all the good stuff. And we know how to turn it up and we know how to turn it down. So we know how to measure it. It is what is, it is the glue, right, that keeps us connected. Apple customers are in sync with each other, for example. Their brains all resonate together, no matter what information they're hearing. You might say, well, that's a little cult-like, and maybe it is, but maybe it's more like family-like, let's say. We don't see that at all in Samsung customers. So in this study with Slalom, we had people measuring their brain activity. They watched a bunch of videos, but importantly, they watched a promotional video for working at Slalom. This is a video to kind of like, you might see it in the elevator or whatever. And it's supposed to get you excited about like all the people and the conditions of work and everything. And it was really cool because what we found is that some slalomers, their brains were highly synchronized watching this video, and slalomers were not. That degree of brain synchrony was a linear predictor of how close those workers said they felt to each of the other people in the study. So that tells us two things. I mean, first of all, it tells us that the characteristics of real world friendships apply to work relationships. That's number one, never been described. And number two, the biological principles of real world closeness also obtain online, right? So people can be working with each other just through this medium, for example, and we could get in sync with each other, and then we would have, we would click, right? So that was really cool, and we were able to kind of dissect that a little bit further, which was I think really neat. So one thing we found is that Slalom has this experience index that is measured, like it has a lot of different questions. So like Slalom cares about my development, or cares about whether I'm helping me to become a better leader, things like that. Brain response to this video precisely tracked how people responded on that survey. So it totally validated the survey, which was pretty cool. And then we found some other things out too. So, for example, you talked about leaders and you talked about workers and how engaged they are. We found much higher levels of brain engagement actually in workers than we found in the leaders while they were watching this video. Like, it really wasn't moving them. Maybe they were distracted. I don't know, but that was interesting. We found that, and this makes some sense, people who were working in a local market actually showed much higher brain synchrony with each other than people who were working in global markets who are, they're not tied to the local culture. They're probably working out of different time zones. They're just, and you can imagine it, right? They probably feel a little bit disconnected, their work life from the rest of their life. And so there are a lot of really interesting, I think, teasers in there that we can pull on. And the final one that I want to bring up is there's a moment in the promotional video that a woman turns around. She's got this T-shirt on, a slalom T-shirt, had this tagline: "Love your work, love your life." And you see this big spike in brain synchrony in response to that, and it was all built around love, and that was super interesting. Love your work, love your life. And it was just at that moment that Slalom was about to embark on a new branding campaign that was called Fiercely Human. And we said, I don't know. I mean, I actually don't know what they've done, but it's like, that might be, maybe you're creating synchrony around love, right? Maybe you should rethink this pivot to fierce.
Yeah, and I don't know if you listened to our show last week, right before Thanksgiving, but we actually interviewed the VP of one of the VPs from Reebok, and they're building what through this courageous conversation. They started this program immediately after George Floyd's incident, and it's been hugely successful. But it's basically building a culture of love. I keep saying is that prior to certainly the pandemic, but certainly going back my 20, 30, 40 years in business, in the business world, when you talked about love in the workplace, people were still concerned is that no, we have a strict policy. You can't
Right.
even date, forget love. You can't even date a coworker. And now we're talking about a culture of love, how things have changed, and how it relates to productivity and engagement and turnover, and retention, and creativity and ideas and all these things. So what a transformation. And part of it is it's not just somebody's hunch. Somebody just didn't write a book or say, I have an idea. Let's create a culture of love. Now it's backed by data and science
Right.
with
Yeah.
what you're doing. And I guess that one of the things that I found fascinating, and certainly I wasn't fully aware of that. I mean, I was familiar with wearables and things. And you have I mentioned you have a company, Cogware. A few weeks ago, we had Paul Zak, and I know you know Paul, and he's got his app, and in the middle of he holds up his app and says, "Yeah, we're in sync." His circle was closing, but there this you don't need to send people to a facility to have a functional MRI anymore.
That's
I
right.
mean, and that's what. So talk a little bit about the wearables, how
Yeah.
this is being done in the workplace.
I mean, it's super exciting. When I moved to Wharton, one of my and really the whole Penn gig, but a big part of my mission, my vision was to make neuroscience, make brain insights available to everybody, right? So whether that's at work or at home, whether that's to improve athletic performance, to improve well-being, improve performance on the job. Uh, but to do that, we had to, get out of the lab. You have to get rid of all the wires and all of the messy gels and all that stuff. And as it turns out, at the time, we were starting to see the introduction of wearable brain monitoring devices. And the problem is that, and we bought all of them and we tried them out, and we were like, oh, we're so unsatisfied. I've been measuring brain activity for decades, and it was just not up to the job because they were either highly wearable and comfortable, but gave you really bad signal quality, or good signal quality, not wearable, not easy to use, messy, etc. So we went to the lab and we experimented for years and then developed a combination of materials in our nanotechnology-backed sensors that give exquisite comfort and also exquisite signal quality. I mean, so it's hard to describe how novel this is. You can actually wear this device and not only move around like this, you can get up, you can walk, and we get no noise, we get no signal interruption. So once you've got that, clinical grade insights, brain insights in a wearable platform. Think of all the different ways you could use that, right? So our company is got one direction that's all brain health, and that's good, clinically oriented, will be FDA approved. And we're currently working on mental health issues, anxiety, depression, also cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, seizure disorders, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole range of really important applications that will shorten the care pathway, make it more precise, make it easier for people, and you can imagine what could be done with that. But the other application space is all non-clinical and is all around things like performance, workplace optimization, right? What we call the responsive workplace. Actually, marketing is we're doing a ton of work right now in digital media optimization and targeting using brain signals essentially on the fly, which is like never been done before. It's super cool. But it really puts us in a position for here's the thing where I want to dispel some ideas that are out there. So there's some, critiques out there that like, oh, this is just going to be for major companies to sort of squeeze every last ounce of productivity out of workers. If they monitor you and if your attention's flagging, then they'll shock you or something to wake you up. That's not what we're talking about at all. I mean, we do this in a de-identified way to get aggregate data. But the important thing is to understand, like, what do different work conditions, what do different built environments, what does like hybrid versus remote versus in person, what do those different situations do to our brains, right? And under what conditions are our brains optimally tuned, say, for being creative versus, getting stuff done, versus, connecting with others. So there's a whole range of different applications in there that also, I think, include something you brought up earlier, which is, mental health and burnout in the workplace as well. So a responsive workplace would take that data and say, okay, this is information, right, that can help guide us to improve the workplace in a scientific way rather than based on your gut, right, or something that you read somewhere. So like I always say, it's not psychology, it's neuroscience.
I'll get myself off of mute here. We're going to take a quick break. And we're talking with Michael Platt from Wharton Neuroscience Initiative. Michael's book, I highly recommend it, is The Leader's Brain. Even if you're not a scientist, don't like reading about science, it's really, really easy to read. It's as much of an HR book, a business leader book, as it is for anyone else. So congratulations of getting it down to a level that we all can understand. And stories are incredibly relevant. And some of them you heard here in the last few minutes, but there's so many other ones, and every chapter is really a lesson that managers and business leaders are wrestling with. So I highly recommend the book. But we're going to be right back with Michael. We're going to take a 1-minute break. We're going to talk a little bit about adaptability. When we come back, I'd like to ask you a question about adaptability and why people are struggling with change and struggling and feel stuck. But also want to pick up on one of our favorite subjects, multitasking. If people are only better multitaskers, besides the Apple, Samsung, this was probably the second biggest takeaway I had from your course this summer. We will be right back in 1 minute.
Are your employees feeling stuck and just showing up for a paycheck? Is your workforce working harder to get back to normal than adapting to the future? It's time to help them break their addiction to certainty and develop a growth mindset. Developed by one of the world's top-rated future of work thought leaders, AQ Plus Mindset is a powerful tool to help your employees embrace change, adapt faster, and grow on the job. Conveniently delivered to any smartphone or laptop in easy to digest 5 to 10 minute lessons. Managers can sit back and watch employee attitude shift towards growth and innovation in just 30 days. Are you ready to help your employees thrive in this ever-changing, never normal world? Encourage them to show more grit, resilience, adaptability, and unlock their potential? The journey to a growth-filled future starts with a growth mindset. Visit aqplusmindset.com or call 484-373-4300.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. I'm here with Michael Platt from Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, and Michael's the author of The Leader's Brain. Michael, you just watched the commercial about growth. Here we're just 32 days away from 2024, which is frightening. Yeah, yikes. And everybody's probably either making their list of New Year's resolutions. We're going to change this in 32 days. That's the end. We're going to stop whatever we were doing wrong and start these new habits. Or people just said, it doesn't matter. I just can't change. I'm too old to change. I'm just stuck in my ways. It's my boss. It's the environment. Or I'll do it next year. Why do people struggle so much? What's the, and again, is it, it's a sense of, I don't want to get too deep into the woods here, but we talked a little bit about this, and I was trying to figure it out when we talked about multitasking, and when we talked about things like the default mode network, which I don't want to get into too techie here, but it's what's going on in our brains that people just have this difficult time.
Well, our habits are hard to break, and that's actually kind of one of the first things brains learned to do on this planet, was to repeat things that made the world kind of a little bit better for you. So you walk over there and you find an M&M and you're like, oh, that was great, and so you're like, maybe I'll do that again. So every animal on the planet has a built-in system for basically learning to repeat behaviors that led to things being a little bit better. Now the problem is that there's something else that's a little farther away that might take a little bit of more difficulty, time, energy, whatever, a little bit of change. You won't discover it when you're stuck in that habit. So you got this incredibly efficient reinforcement system in your brain that's driven by dopamine. That's what dopamine does. People think of it as a pleasure chemical. It's really the satisfaction chemical, and it's there to build habits. Habits are efficient, okay? And so to get out of habits, we have to engage a different system. And that's actually a couple systems, but one really important one is the one that allows you to disengage from something that is kind of rewarding, or at least kind of makes things, it's a little satisfying, and make the effort to try something new, to go search for something new. So we're smart critters. Other mammals are smart critters, mice, monkeys, dogs. They also have that system. And it's there precisely for that reason, to help you break out of routine and look for something new. But the conditions under which that gets engaged, it's sometimes hard to get that engaged, right? And you need to know that there's something better out, or at least imagine there's something better out there. And you have to kind of nudge it, provoke it, get it going. And that is just a really, really hard thing to do. Now, that kind of behavior change, and everybody's talking about behavior change these days, right? How do I get unstuck from routines? How do I look for New Year's Day, New Year's resolutions? Like, oh, I want to lose weight. I'm going to be more active. I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to cut down on drinking, whatever. But our old friend, the habits, are really hard to break. But my friend and colleague Emily Falk here at Penn in the Annenberg School, who uses neuroscience to study behavior change and communication, what she's found is that there's basically what you've got to do is get outside yourself, right? So we need self-transcendent thinking. Okay, so when you think about not necessarily just what it means to you, but what might it mean to the people I love? If I imagine the impact on society, or I just even think about something that's bigger than myself, this can kind of get that activation energy going. And you're actually more likely to get up and try something new, to break that habit, and more likely to stick with it as well.
Yeah, and it seems it's not only personal. I mean, if we're talking about from managers, I mean, how can managers help? I mean, they have all these initiatives, and we're going to bring in somebody, we're going to hire somebody who is a coach, or we're going to have a training in a group, or we're going to have morning huddles, and they do all these little things, but essentially, we're as you said, creating new habits, and first of all, breaking old habits is difficult, and again, you delve into this a lot in the book and in the course. So, and there's everybody's writing about it. So I hope people pursue this. This is well, what I hope to do today was make this connection that
Mm-hmm.
doing the same thing over and over again the way you didn't, and reinforcing it or dangling a new carrot in front of everybody isn't necessarily going to change, because now we understand the neurotransmitters, how the brain waves, how we rewire our brains, and even focus, how we do that in
Yeah,
a better way.
yeah. I mean, one of the things you mentioned default mode network, which is in my view, that's the system that causes us to explore. It provokes us to explore. So we've done it. You stimulate it directly even, and you provoke
But
exploration
but
directly.
haven't we shut that down? I mean, so that curiosity, that ability to explore, to try something new, and again, environment has a great deal to do with that, because if we try something and fail and then you get punished for it, it's not a really good way to to change the
Well,
habit.
I mean, yeah. I mean, so there's a couple of things going on here. One is that you can't engage this so-called default mode network. I call it the exploration or innovation network because it underlies search, exploration, creativity, divergent thinking, getting outside the box, right? To get that network going, you have to disengage from routine. So the more time you spend staring at a screen, the harder it is to actually engage exploratory thought. Try something new. You can't do it, and even, it's even worse if you're picking up your phone, which, because for some reason, the way it just the haptic sense of it in your hand is close, it's personal, and we're a little more emotional, and our brain has just become glued to it. And so when you're glued to the phone, you're glued to the screen, your default mode network is completely shut down, and it needs to be active to try something new, to go out and explore. So yeah, that's tough. And when you talk about the environment and we look at creativity, for example, there are a number of different measures that suggest that you're at your kind of creative peak when you're 5 years old, and then by the time you're 18, you're at about I don't know, 1% of that, and then by 31,
Mhm.
you're basically at floor. And we don't know whether that's. I don't think it's just maturation. I think it's just the way that we, as a society, do education, right? Because we're basically trying to keep kids sitting still and focused, and making sure they get their worksheets done on time. So there's no room to explore. There's no room to get that default mode network going. And if you couple that with the rising, really exponentially rising diagnosis of attention deficit disorders of a variety of sorts, and the frontline treatment for that is drugs, stimulants that increase dopamine. So they increase that routine, that hyper focus, which can certainly be helpful for getting things done, but it crushes exploration, right? It potentially crushes creativity. And so I think those two forces coming together may be putting us behind the eight ball for the future. All those young innovators that we're going to need to solve the biggest problems facing society, from climate change to artificial intelligence. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'm just smiling here because some of the one of those aha moments, some of the ideas just clicked from of a lot of the exercises that keep people focused. We want people to grow, we want them to be innovative, and that's all over their cultures and their values and their training. And then the first thing what happens is how do we keep people focused? And I'm convinced that if managers could prescribe Adderall and other medications to treat ADD to all their employees, they'd probably do it rather than change their own behavior and to change the environment of how do you create an environment, or not how, but creating an environment that encourages growth and innovation, but at the same time is does allow people to focus and get things done.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think this gets back to I think something you said earlier, but is definitely true, which is making space, and I think this is across the board. So making space to disengage downtime better, even if you can get up and walk and move around. Better still if you can go walk with somebody else. So walk and talk. You're getting exercise. You're disengaging so that default mode network is active to maybe more creative. You're getting social connection at the same time. I mean, that's a perfect recipe for brain health and high brain performance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm teaching innovation and entrepreneurship. We just did a exercise on ideation, and we exposed undergrad students to brainstorming, brain dumping, brain walking, and those are good exercises, not just to say, oh, let's have a creative session, but just how do you get people to detach for
Mm,
a few minutes and to generate those ideas. And obviously you can't brainstorm and brain walk by yourself. I mean, you
right.
can, but I think what you're talking about. I mean, is and I've heard this said before, but I'm probably one of the biggest, I won't say advocates, but probably the biggest sayers of this. Is I get these greatest moments when I'm in the shower. Because
Absolutely.
you can't do anything. I can't pick up my phone. You're sitting there and you're thinking, and these ideas come, and sometimes it literally is just walking away. Our time is like going incredibly faster, Michael. Fortunately, this is like the fastest hour of the week. Um, I don't want to leave this hanging, and we skirted around it, but two things I just want you to comment on. We don't have to go into depth. One is the left brain, right brain, because I started the show that way, and I pulled that up today because I was looking for a stat for perfect labor summary. So maybe there's a stat about that. And I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of of links came back about how to encourage people to be more left-brained and right-brained. And so talk about that just for a second.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a total myth that has no reality. So this notion that the left brain is like all about focus and task execution, and it's rational and it works with numbers, and the right brain is creative and emotional, colorful and musical. It's all just wrong. But the metaphor is a little bit right. So it turns out these systems are on both sides of our brains. There's a task network that is on the right and the left, and it's all about focus and getting stuff done. And then there's the default mode network, which we already talked about, or innovation network, which is on both sides of the brain. And these two networks are typically like a yin and yang in the brain. So one goes up, the other one goes down, and they're both really necessary, right? So you do need to focus to execute at times, but you also need to disengage so you can come up with new ideas, so you can explore, etc. So there's sort of this, back and forth, up and down, and we need to have that space for those two things to happen. I think the notion of left brain, right brain, I don't know. I mean, it derives from the fact that language is a little bit more localized to the left side of the brain in most people who are right-handed, but it doesn't mean that it's all on the left or all on the right. But a person who has a stroke to the left side of their brain will have more language impairments than a person who has it on the right, unless they're a woman. So that who have more even distribution across two sides. But all these other functions, there's nothing to that at all.
So the biggest takeaway from that is managers stop hiring for left brain and firing because they have a right brain, right?
Right.
So and just a really quick and we just skirted around this issue before with multitasking and things. So we're really not multitaskers. I love how you described it. I think I picked it up either in the book or during the course. Is that we're task switchers?
Correct.
Yeah.
We really can't multitask. Despite the fact that each of us has roughly 86 billion neurons in our brains, sounds like a lot. Turns out it's not very much. I mean, so we're surprisingly limited in what we can do. And the reality is that our brains have evolved to be extremely efficient Okay, because our brain consumes less power than a 20-watt light bulb. Okay, and yet is more powerful than these computing systems that have wet racks of servers that are consuming enormous amounts of electricity. So how do our brains do that? By being super efficient. Okay. And our brains are efficient by not being able to process everything at one time. There's a limitation on what we can process. Maybe it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items at once. Maybe you can hold in your mind. We know the more options you add to a menu, the harder it is to make a choice. The more things you're asked to do at any one time, the more likely you are to make a mistake. And so what we do is we serially direct our attention from one object or train of thought to another. We just can't really divide it. And I think that this also plays to or speaks to this silly notion that attention spans have been getting shorter over the last 20, 30, 10,000 years. I've heard that even. Now our attention spans are shorter than a goldfish. I don't know how you measure attention in a goldfish, but no. What's happened really is that there are more things that we can, more sources of information in the environment. So the average person has probably got like 5, 6, 7 devices open at once. A young person anyway, and they're just cycling between all these things. So the more things there are, the more rapidly you should cycle. It's a pure principle. It's a mathematical principle about exactly what your brain should do. And then we know this algorithm is baked into our brains and the brains of every other animal on this planet. So you're doing the right thing. We just need to reduce the clutter. You just need to create a clean environment and have one thing at a time that you're focused on.
Yeah, so I want to thank you, because if the category of multi-distractions and multiple devices at the same time is equivalent with being young, I got to thank you for that, because I had to shut down X number of way too many windows and devices before we came on the air, so I can focus on this. One final question I have before we dig into our lightning round is, I always like to ask our guests, is there something I should have asked you but I didn't, or you wanted me to ask you but I didn't?
Oh, wow. Something I wish or you should have asked me. I think we covered a lot of ground, Ira.
We
I
did.
mean, we did. So
So much more. I have I have a long list
well,
of
and
questions, so hopefully you'll come back another time. So
you've done a great job. I mean, I guess I would say this. So this is sort of like my lightning round. So like brain hacks, for work and for life. And we talked about a number of different things. But look, if there's one thing that anybody out here wants to do to make their brains work better and work better for longer, physical exercise. We know physical exercise is critical for the health of your body, just as critical, if not more, for the health of your brain. So the more you exercise, the greater the vascularization, or the greater the blood flow in your brain, and also the less inflammation. Inflammation is a killer. Inflammation is what brings on neurodegenerative disease. It is how stress eats your brain. Through inflammation. And a great way to reduce inflammation is through exercise. So exercise, connect with other people. We know it's really important to combat loneliness. Loneliness is worse for you than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So get out there. Every time you even have a conversation with the barista at Starbucks, that's like getting on the treadmill for your brain. Okay, you're giving a little exercise, and it's going to work better, and you're going to be less lonely. So those are two really critical take-home messages. Yeah.
Yeah. What and before we jump into the lightning round, what was your biggest takeaway? What was your the biggest surprise moment you had from the summit? What was if you can narrow it down to one?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. So our summit was on brain capital, in case folks don't know that, and brain capital, that is our asset, as individuals and as societies. It's the cognitive and emotional resources that we have within our heads, under threat from a variety of different sources: technology, loneliness, mental health.
Yeah, I mean, one of my questions was about AI and things, but
Yeah,
that's gonna be another show, Michael.
I know. So, I mean, I guess what was so heartening was that, and maybe that's surprising, is how many people really cared about this, right? And from many different angles, government, private sector, academia, from the perspective of investing in children to build the brain capital of the future, from the perspective of investing in older people to, continue to have them be productive and healthy members of society, from the perspective of the private sector managers investing in the brain capital of their workers to, even if they didn't care about workers themselves as people, like that's your bottom line, right? That's your biggest asset, is their brain power. So I think making the case for investing in brain capital across the lifespan, from government, from private sector, from NGOs is very, very clear.
Okay, let's move into the lightning round as we talked about.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, these are the trick questions. These are the hard ones. What's your favorite song, or favorite type of music, or favorite band?
Wow, I'm such a audiophile. Man, I listen to music all the time. I play music with my boys. I'm a bad guitar player. They're talented guitar, banjo, and bass players. So,
wow.
So we do like a lot of kind of rock, country rock. Been doing a lot of bluegrass lately. I have no
Well,
favorite
that fits up
song. I
here.
just can't. Yeah, it does. Well, I spent 15 years in North Carolina as well. But actually, the weird thing is I learned to play banjo in New York City.
Okay, wouldn't necessarily associate that.
Exactly.
If you're old enough to go back to reunions or see people that have friends from 30, 40 years ago, what would they say if we talked to them? What would they be most surprised about you?
I know they'd be shocked at what I'm doing. So, yeah, I think nobody would. I mean, I know they are, because I see them now, and they're like, "What? You're at Wharton? What are you doing there? You're in neuroscience. Last I saw you, you're an
You weren't
anthropologist."
valedictorian of your class?
I was not valedictorian of my class. I'm kind of a washed up jock, honestly. So somehow landed on my feet.
Yeah, excellent. Final question: if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Ooh, that's great. I mean, I would normally want to fly, but as a washed up jock, I've been having these funny dreams where, like, I can actually run really fast again and it doesn't hurt. So that would be a great superpower, to be able to run really fast and it have no pain.
I thought you were going to go down the path of flying and teleporting. We had a lot of people talk
No,
about teleporting.
well, teleporting would be great. I have a lot of travel coming up, and honestly, that would be
Yeah,
awesome. Although I appreciate the downtime, actually, sometimes on a long flight. It's pretty nice.
for sure. Really appreciate you being here. We've been running the banners across so that people can see. For those who are listening, you can get the Leader's Brain either on Wharton's site, or probably easier to go to Amazon and pick that up there. What other ways can people get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out to you, Michael?
I mean, you can Google me, and I have several email addresses, but you can follow me on social media. I'm pretty prolific on LinkedIn and X, Twitter. So that's a good place to start. And we have
Yeah.
a lot of free content also, I should say, on Wharton website that we've created.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the name of it was. You had a list of a whole lot of
We have
activities.
like nano tools
The
and
nano
other
tools, yeah,
longer
yeah.
articles. So those
Oh
nano
man,
tools are
they're
really
amazing.
short. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, they're amazing, and yeah, so many other resources. So I know you've got an incredibly busy schedule. We were talking a little bit about the show. Wish you a very happy holiday, safe travels. Hopefully you get some downtime. Definitely want to, we'll be keeping in touch, and love to have you back at some time. Obviously, it's so many opportunities and fields that are changing. This field
Thanks,
is changing.
Ira. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's very dynamic. There's so many things, and that my book is like so out of date at this point. So
yeah, it's like
I
two
need to
years
write
old.
another one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
get it. I totally get it. So appreciate that. We want to thank everybody for being part of Googleization Nation, for listening to Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. Thanks for helping us be occasionally in the top 10. We were number 1 about 2 weeks ago in leadership. So, Michael, hopefully this will take us up there
Awesome.
again. Yeah, we're routinely in the top 100 on Apple, on top 10 and Good Pods. So I appreciate that. Thank you for listening. Please share this, let other people know about it. And until next week, don't let the shift hit your plans.
Thanks for watching Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. Be sure to listen to the podcast and follow us on YouTube. This show was produced and edited by Hilton Productions.